But yeah, so I mean, it reminds me of what I've heard similar ideas of like groups that have kind of like quote unquote assimilated into homophobia.
Yeah, homophobia, transphobia, these things are not indigenous to Africa.
Hmm.
They're indigenous to Europe.
Sure.
Um, but the really I'm going to say admirable, but I don't mean admirable.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe I really mean sinister.
Okay.
The sinister thing about white supremacy is that it gets its target to believe it.
Hmm.
So um, to internalize it, to believe that, your ideas or white supremacy's ideas are mine.
Hmm.
So you have now in modern Africa, um, continental Africans who actually believe um, the precepts of homophobia and transphobia, and ignore or don't even know their own histories,
Hmm.
how their forebears, how their ancestors um, incorporated these states of being as nature,
Hmm.
which is what they are. They're just a
Right.
part. Homosexual, the transgender person is a part of nature.
Right.
And so I took all of those before time ideas or pre-colonial ideas, and I said I'm going to weave those throughout this mythical tribe that I'm creating, so that the reader understands the Eurocentric way of understanding the world is not default. It
Right.
is not set in stone.
Right.
It's constructed,
Sure. And it's not the way it's always been.
and it's not the way.
Nowhere close to it, right?
Right.
Right. I mean, is it a too simplistic of a comparison or an analog that like the that Amos would be representative of that internalized not internalized homophobia, but that learned homophobia?
Yes, he Amos is actually one of my favorite characters in the book because of the
Hmm.
conundrum that he's
Yes.
facing. He doesn't hate Samuel and Isaiah. He in fact loves them, but he also loves Essie.
Hmm.
And he is being a politician, quite frankly.
Right.
Um,
Right.
he's trying to figure out, how do I protect my wife, um, and I can protect my wife if I can get these boys to do what Massa wants them to do. And so I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm going to utilize whatever influence I have to make that so.
Right.
Um, but in the process, he is internalizing the ways of white supremacy,
Hmm.
Christianity, his master, and so on and so forth. So he's creating harm, even though that's not his intention.
Right. So he's a convert to Christianity. I mean, kind of self-converted, not forced, at least violently, but definitely subtly by Paul, by the master. But do you understand him to have become a preacher, become a minister, if you will, solely to how much of it how much of it do you think is pure wanting to know something greater, something bigger?
I think after he has this spiritual, unexplainable experience where he thinks now he has a better understanding of Christianity than Paul does,
Hmm.
he believes it's coming from a real place and that he has been called.
Yes.
Um, but the other part of it, and I would venture to say that most preachers in the real world are also like this. The power
Yes.
is seductive.
Hmm.
Um, and how I know when you are being genuine and when you are just being abusive
Sure.
is, what do you do with your power?
Hmm.
Are you using it to preach from your pulpit that women should be secondary, that the LGBTQIA community is an abomination? Um, or are you using it to lift people up, to
Right.
inspire people to be
Right.
their best selves, to be kind and generous and humane and loving to one another, irrespective of our identities?
Mm.
If you're doing the former, then I know you're just a huckster. You're a power broker, and you're just in it for the wealth.
Right.
If you're doing the latter, perhaps you really feel that you're called by some higher power to make the world a better place.
Hmm. You talk about Amos being, I don't know if you said one of your favorite characters, right? And he is, like, what you do so well in this book is that there are many characters, but they're also their own individuals. They have their own stories. We get to know most, if not all, of their stories. Talking about Isaiah and Samuel, who we mentioned, of course. I mean, it's safe to say that the story revolves around them and about their love. They're what, late teens, early 20s?
I in my head, I never
Right.
give ages because enslaved people didn't know when they were born, and so time operated differently for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for the purposes of me understanding Samuel and Isaiah, I would say that they are about 18, 19,
Okay.
no older than 20.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have them by the right? They knew their age by the seasons, and of course
Right.
they're not going to remember exactly how many, but it's an estimate, like you talked about.
Right.
So like we said, the story does revolve around them and about their love. They are put into the barn, with which they take that and they do a great job, whatever that means in the eyes of the slave master, right? They keep it clean, they keep it efficient, but they're also orphans,
Yes.
right? They don't have the family, they don't have the parents, and have the mother and father with them because of all the horrors that they've gone through. And they find a love within each other. They find their brothers as well as lovers, right?
In a sense, they are brothers in that they understand what it's like to be alone,
Mm.
have been snatched out of the arms of your loved ones and treated as cattle,
Mm-hmm.
to be loaded onto a wagon like stuff. And I think that might even lend to why they are so deeply in love with each other, because they can kind of communicate without words. Their
Mm-hmm.
love is on a different level because of their shared experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the probably the primary state of enslavement was
Mm.
orphanhood.
Right.
Families were broken apart intentionally, by the powers that be. Um, so yeah, it's sad, but I think that's what draws them to one another.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about intention, and not exactly the same topic, but I've seen in other interviews you've talked about, how there are people in black communities who will say that, homosexuality was invented by the white man to break up, right? To break up the community, right? You're laughing at that. Um, and then I guess also the idea of, um, the fact that obviously it was such a black, like you talk about, it's nature, it's not nurture, right? They are born this way. It is biology, it is hormones, it is the way they are, the way they're born. And then homophobia gets into the way and comes along later. But I guess just the idea of where that fits into this particular book, this idea that how Paul sees it, I guess, how Paul, the slave master, sees their homosexuality. Does he see any benefit in it again about, because it's always about breaking up families and splitting them apart? How does he see it? Does he see it in a moral way that's clouded by his white supremacy? It's kind of a long way of asking. How does he see that?
He sees it as a threat to capitalism.
Okay.
I need these two bucks to
Right.
breed. I need them to breed.
Yes.
And their um companionship, their partnership, their relationship does not is not conducive to the amount of money I need to make from them.
Right.
And that really is the root of
Hmm.
homophobia.
Hmm.
It is, I need you to make additional laborers. I need you to make additional soldiers,
Hmm.
um, so that I can exploit and make more and more and more and more. Homosexuality it's no longer that way due to modern science,
Hmm.
was a threat to the
Right.
capitalist arrangement of things, because you needed the nuclear family to for it to be optimal conditions for the making of more and more and more and more.
Right.
Um, Now homosexuals though are married. I'm married. I've been married for 3 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And having their own families and emulating the heterosexual model.
Hmm.
So um, that's a little bit of why homosexuality is slightly more acceptable now, because we as homosexuals can prove to our oppressors, well, we
Hmm.
can be like you. And
Hmm.
that's really what it's conformity that they want.
Hmm.
They don't want you to be different. And so
Conformity.
yeah.
The hypocrisy, the irony of, of Paul having so many kids out there, right? Like, Adam, who's the driver, who's his son with an unknown mother, right? Unknown to him, at least. There are moments when he's like, he's not, he's about to call him father. And it's like, I can't call him father, right? I mean, he's, just a sperm donor, right? But yeah, I mean, the irony, obviously, I mean, he has so many kids that are on the plantation, that are outside the plant, just the irony of, the nuclear family, the godly family, and all of that we talk about.
We see that all the time with the GOP.
Mm.
They get up on their pulpits and on their microphones, and they're talking about family values this and family values that, and then if you scratch the surface, they're freaks like everybody else.
What are you saying? Are you saying that Donald Trump's not a family man? Madison Cawthorn? Are you saying that Madison, what's her name, Green? You're saying they're not family people? Are you sure about that?
Scratch the surface and you'll
Oh
find
my
a
gosh. Oh my gosh. I am shocked. I am absolutely shocked. The the structure of the book, is many of them are labeled with, their biblical stories, biblical chapters. It starts off with the ancestors. Is that too generic of a term?
no, not at all.
No, right? And there the whispers, and they talk about, one of the lines that really stuck with me was, quote, "You thought we were the dead, and you the living." Right? I mean, it's very similar to, like a Greek chorus. I don't think it's in the first chapter, but a little bit later on, it's, we need you. I'm gonna ask you about the you in a minute, but we need you to do one thing first, and that's to remember. But also, memory is not enough. Who
Mm.
who who is the you? Is it who are the ancestors speaking to? One of us, all of us, all of the African diaspora?
They're speaking to one of us and all of us.
Mm,
um they are speaking to the reader.
sure.
They are speaking to me, the writer. They are speaking to the characters. So yes, they are speaking to one of us at a time and all of us
Mm,
at the same time.
right.
Um, and the idea of that came to me in a dream.
Okay.
I dreamt about an ancestor who was trying to teach me how to till the soil.
Mm,
And how to plant, and I was doing it all wrong. And he stood back and he put his hands on his hips and he said, "You do not yet know us.
yet.
Oh,
Uh,
do not yet know us." And that's the line in the book. That
yes.
came to me in a dream. And then I took that, I interpreted that as, oh, the ancestors want a voice in this.
Mm,
And maybe they deserve one because they can lead the reader through some of the more complicated or rough parts of this.
wow. What were the ancestors not part of the book at that point?
No, they
Oh
were not.
wow. Oh my gosh.
This, the original version of the prophets, the very first version I wrote down, was only one person's point of view.
Mm,
It was going to be structured like a fictionalized slave narrative,
okay.
where the enslaved person was recounting their life.
Okay.
But I quickly realized that didn't give me the room to really talk about all of the things that I wanted to cover.
Mm.
And I realized sometime down the line, maybe draft 5 or 6 or 7, that the real story was the love between these two characters, and
Yes.
that love
Yes.
needed witnesses
Uh,
from across time and across dimensions.
wow. I'm sure that one person's story book would have been incredible. It's like, but now we can't imagine it without all of these characters, right?
Yeah, that's, sometimes I go back to the first thing that I wrote down and I read it and I think, not bad writing.
Hmm.
It just couldn't accomplish what I needed it to.
Sure. You talk about the witnesses, and there's Maggie, for example, who's a motherly or sisterly figure to, well, I guess more like motherly or big sister, auntie maybe for Samuel and Isaac. Um, but there's also, and like you talk about, they for the most part, those watching, they understand the love, they understand Isaiah and Samuel, until obviously some of them are taken from the group by Amos with this, well, it's not Christian, etc. But also so much, I love how they are together, Isaiah and Samuel. They're often called what, the two of them,
Two of them,
but
yes.
they're also very individual.
Mhm.
And I want to say that Isaiah has the first word in the book, and he is the one who's. So I'd love to talk about, if you could talk about a little bit about Isaiah with his original name, right, given to him by his parents, that Amos was kind of in possession of. So I guess
Yes.
I guess maybe how you separated the two, and then how they're also as one character, as a composite.
Um, Isaiah is the one who is, despite what happens in the book plot wise,
Okay.
Isaiah, I think, is the more courageous of the two, because he's the one that's like, my love for you will not be diminished by anyone
Right. Right.
for any reason. I will not pretend. I will not go along with anything that separates me from you.
Hmm.
Whereas Samuel, who is the more physical, the
Yes.
more aggressive of the two, is sort of like, well, let's do what we got to do. We can just pretend, and we can still love each other, but we can just pretend.
Right.
Isaiah's like, I refuse. I will
Hmm.
not. I would rather die
Hmm.
and than lie about what I feel about you. Um, and the two of them together are then sort of like a yin and yang, because
Sure.
then in the throes of lovemaking, it's Isaiah who's the the aggressor, the
Right.
one who is dominating and
Hmm.
such. So this shared space, it's almost like two spirits becoming one, and then as the one, they're a fuller thing.
Correct.
And so it was important to make them distinct, because I
Hmm.
think during the writing process, if I remember correctly, that was the constant critique I was getting from my editor was, let's make sure that they're distinct
Hmm.
as individuals. And so I worked hard at trying to ensure that Isaiah's more laid back approach was clear and forward,
Hmm.
and Samuel's bull in a china shop
Right.
self
Right.
was given the room that it deserved.
Right. there's a there's an extremely moving moment where I believe it's Isaiah asked Samuel, like, or no, I think it's the other way around. Samuel asked, like, do you remember your mom? Right. And that,
Isaiah at Samuel, yes. Do
thank
you
you.
remember?
Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. And that starts obviously a full flood of emotions that, they're always there, but it brings it to the fore. But
Yes.
so I'd love to you to talk a little bit about Isaiah and that and his name, and I guess just the importance of names, right? Obviously, you write about in the book how almost literally the first thing that the slave master would do would give a name, right? His
Yes.
name that he chose, irrespective of where the person came from, didn't matter, right? Just the
The,
importance of names, and Isaiah's in particular.
in terms of the naming practice of enslaved people, the enslavers were trying their damnedest to get the enslaved to forget everything about themselves,
Mm.
where the, excuse me, where they were from, uh, what their people were called, what their real names were. And it most interesting to me was that they would often give them Christian names,
Right.
biblical names,
Right.
um, as a means to say you have been conquered.
Mm.
Um, and so, in terms of Isaiah, his parents give him a name from what they remembered about their old selves
Mm.
before they were enslaved. And his name has a special meaning for them. His original name, if I remember correctly, is the one who brings joy,
Right.
is what it means. And
Coyote or coyote?
coyote.
Coyote.
And one of my favorite parts of the book really is when Amos is thinking about telling him his name, telling Isaiah his real name,
Mm-hmm.
because he's in possession of it. He
Right.
knows Isaiah's real name is. And he's, thinking about, if he would just bend to my will, then I can give him this information he wants. And
Mm.
how much joy would he have knowing that his parents named him this specifically because they already knew who he was.
Yes.
Um, and so that battle between Isaiah and Coyote, and the only time he actually hears it, he doesn't even know what he's hearing.
Mm.
Um, is I the naming practice was just really important to me because I realized how much it it was a part of the enslavement
Mm.
to snatch away a name and to rename.
Right. Right. You talk about like, yeah, I mean, all of those links being cut, and there's one of the characters, forgetting which one, but she talks about, she almost like slipped up, I think just in her head, but used the term maybe Yovo, right?
Yes,
Like foreigner or white man, right? When the others use two, how do you pronounce it? Tubob,
to Bob.
right? Which I definitely remember from Roots,
Yes,
right? The term for a white man, and that was the one used. I mean, it was so interesting to me too that it was used. I kind of had the impression that would have been used very early on in the American slave trade, but the fact that maybe only that from the language from Africa persisted, but it did.
and I chose to Bob very specifically. It's a Wolof word,
Okay.
and it means to convert.
Oh wow.
Because what the Wolof people noticed about Europeans was that they were coming and they were changing them. They were, or attempting to change them. So they would call them the converters.
Oh wow. Very interesting.
Yovo is another term. I can't remember what region it's from, but it refers to lacking skin or color.
Right. That
Yeah.
was more about the outward looks. That's interesting. I figured Tubob was more outward as well. Thank you for your for the Wikipedia rabbit hole. I want to say that Yovo is Beninese,
There it is,
right?
from Benin. Yes,
From
Benin,
Benin.
Benin, Togo. Yes.
So there's the parallel story of the kingdom of Kosongo, right? That we talked about. King Akusa, am I saying that name correctly?
Yes.
Would you would you classify King Akusa as non-binary? What would, in the 2022 terms,
Um,
or do we not categorize?
King Akusa. See, the what I loved so much about the research process was how pre-colonial Africans thought so wildly different about gender than we could even imagine.
Right.
That things like manhood and womanhood didn't mean the same things that they mean for us.
Hmm. Like we
Um,
can't unlearn that almost, right?
right. Because those of us who have been educated in Eurocentric systems tie genitals very closely to gender and gender identity. So if you have a penis, you are a man. If you have a vagina, you are a woman. And that is, there's no
In the
ifs, no
story.
ands, or buts, or
Right.
suppose. Binary.
Hmm.
In Africanist views, your genitals had nothing to do with your gender.
Wow.
You got in some of the societies in Nigeria, for example, the child wasn't even given a gender. They decided when they became an adult what they wanted to be.
The person themselves did.
The person themselves
Uh,
decided as at adulthood, okay, I think I'm a man, or I'm a non-binary person, or I'm a woman, or
hmm,
I'm none of those things.
hmm,
You know, they chose.
hmm.
And King Akusa, um, no one's ever asked me what her gender identity is, or her gender. Um, I think she's a woman. I think. Um, but she also might be non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
Or she might be both a man and a woman. Um, that's a really good question. I'd have to think about that. But she is capable of being pregnant and having children.
Right.
Um, but I don't know if she would think of herself as a woman,
Hmm.
or she might think of herself as a woman sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
She might be fluid.
Sure.
Um, so thank you for asking that question, because it made me think about it.
There's such a subtle and such a great scene where there's a translator with King Akusa and the Portuguese I forget the guy in charge of the Portuguese, I forget his name.
Gabriel, brother Gabriel.
Brother Gabriel, right? And the translator changes. I think Brother Gabriel says Your Highness, or a female term,
Yes.
and the translator's sure to twist it, right? So yes, some things are lost in translation in our world, but sometimes it's a successful thing. It's beneficial, right?
Yes.
To have that
Yes.
in between. um, I love to talk about Timothy and Ruth. Timothy is the son, is the is the white man, is the son of Paul.
Yes.
He goes to school in the north. He's the also the son of Ruth, who, if possible, is maybe even more detestable than Paul, in my in my opinion. Right? I mean, she's yeah. But is Timothy kind of representative of, he doesn't use the N word. He uses the more, we say politically correct term. He's gone to the north. He for sure has privilege, and for sure perpetuates, racism, but he thinks he doesn't. Maybe is he kind of representative of like an in between, or like a, quote unquote well-meaning white man? Um, he basically, while it may not be physical, he's a rapist, right?
Yes, he is. Um, and one of the things I learned about rapists is most of them don't think that they're rapists.
Hmm.
Um, they think rape is when you are hiding in the alley, waiting
Sure.
for somebody to walk by, and you violently take something from them. They don't understand that rape there's levels to it, and that
Mm,
all it requires is you not getting clear, explicit consent from the
correct.
other person. That's all it requires.
Right.
Because most people would then say, gosh, there are times in my life when I didn't get clear, explicit consent from someone I assumed
Mm,
that they wanted to. And then that would then implicate themselves, and most people don't want to be implicated.
mm,
Accountability is always for other people.
sure.
That's one of the things social media taught me, actually.
Yeah.
Why I'm glad to be gone.
Sadly, you're correct. Yeah, you're right on with that. Oh my gosh. So his victims her victims is Isaiah, as his supposedly his painting subject, right? And obviously you could not have more of a power structure imbalance, than Timothy and Isaiah,
Right.
right? So like you talk about it, it may not be, in a dark alley, but it was definitely rape. And
Indeed.
yeah, so I mean, is there a sympathy to be had for Timothy? Is there a sympathy to be had for every character, even Ruth, even Paul?
Yes. The sympathy I have for them is, gosh, you forfeited your humanity and you don't even know it.
Hmm.
I feel terrible for you. I'm so sad for you. That's when when I was writing Timothy, Ruth, and Paul, and James.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the things I was thinking, because first of all, I had to find reasons for why they were the way they
Right,
were.
right.
Um, because no one is just a monster. That's only in comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Real life, people become the things that they become because of the lives they've lived. Whether some of us, of course, not all of us are affected in the same way by our circumstances. Some people can go through the identical things and take two completely
Sure.
different paths, but those things still affect us,
Mm.
whether for good or for ill. So I, particularly for Paul, I needed to understand what could have made you look at another human being and say property. Um, and so part of the reason why his chapter is so long is because I was trying to find the answer to that question.
Mm. Mm.
And it took me he was the most difficult character to write.
I'm sure.
Um, Ruth, who is my husband's favorite character, he cackled throughout the entire time he was reading it. He was like, "Oh my God, oh my God." Um, she's, dealing with some things too as a woman.
Sure.
Um, but here's one of the things I learned about oppression that breaks my heart. Being oppressed does not teach you to be a better person. It teaches you how to be an oppressor.
Mm.
So I can't rely on the fact that I'm Black or queer or poor or grew up in an urban neighborhood to give me the required tools to be a good person.
Mm.
As Toni Morrison said, that's not enough.
Mm.
I have to work at empathy and kindness and humanity and being able to see that in other people. That has to be a conscious decision on my part. And for many people, they think because I'm a woman or because I'm whatever oppressed in this particular way, that automatically grants me something that makes me more human or more humane. And that's not been my observation.
Mm. Mm.
And so you see that with Timothy, who's a queer character,
Mm.
Ruth, who is a woman, James, who is poor,
Mm.
and Paul, who was, for all intents and purposes, an abused child.
Sure.
They did not use those experiences to broaden their humanity. They used those experiences to forfeit it.
Mm. Mm. You talk about the long chapter with Paul. I mean, I don't know if it's in the same chapters, but two of the scenes. One's where he goes out to the bar, just kind of by himself, just to let out some steam. Like many people do. But his steam is, all of the evil and things that he's done at the plantation, and things that are going on there. But he gets the crap beat out of him. Basically, he gets set up, but he has this revelation or whatever. At least he thinks. I think it's probably just the whiskey speaking to him, but he has this revelation, and he's talking to Adam, who is, again, his biological son, and just kind of like, how great is the Lord, and how great are we to have his favor. And that's like when you're talking about how could another person think that another person could be property. He continues to justify and justify and justify through the holy book, right?
And at the same time, nearly looks at Adam as his son.
Almost, right? Almost.
Almost, because as evil as any human being can be, and human beings, gosh, can be evil.
Oh yeah.
There's still always a little tiny glimmer, flash of something, even if they're trying to suppress it, trying to get rid of it, or they do so many monstrous things that it overwhelms it. There's still that little thing in them because they are still a human being despite being a monster at the same time.
Right. Right. And you for sure do not let him off the hook. There's also that scene where, he basically craps his pants, I mean, all the way down his pants, right? And just, he feels like, almost like in a flash, he feels like he's the one on his knees. The degrading thing, I mean, couldn't, so degrading to Maggie, who comes out has to clean it, and he keeps giving her instructions, and the instructions are bad. So it's almost like a comedy of errors, right? If it wasn't such a horrific situation.
And what I love about that scene, and a few people got this, is that Maggie and Essie are purposely playing him.
Yeah.
Purposely.
Oh, you only told me this, right? You only told me this piece. I just did what you told me.
Yes. So they're like really twisting, using his own words against him, in a kind of way, and they kind of look at each other, knowingly that they're doing this to him, and making him, well, he's making a fool of himself, and they're enjoying it.
No doubt about it. no doubt about it. It reminds you of like, the ideas of like I don't think trickster's the term, but like in like minstrel shows and vaudeville and stuff like that, right? Where kind of like who's playing who,
Right. Right.
right? And so much, below, we get to know Maggie pretty early on in the book, and there's so much going on with her. I mean, she does, little poisonings every once in a while, right? And those kind of things.
She's everyone's favorite character, by the way.
Oh man, she's great. She's great. The beauty of this book, and there's so much beauty of this book. There's so many horrific things. Just from a craft point of view, the writing is just incredible. But I think he unfortunately knew what he was talking about. It's been attributed to Stalin. Whoever said this idea of a single death, a million deaths is a statistic, a single death is a tragedy.
Mm.
You put the single person into focus so well, and to get to know these characters, they're not in any way what's the term, they're not flat characters, they're dynamic characters. And the way that you're able to do that, not just for one character but 6 or 7 or 10, is just an absolute just work of art, and almost like a miracle. So I'm just in awe of your writing and your storytelling, and it's just been an absolute honor to talk to you about the rationale and the background, and just thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. You've asked me questions that no one has ever asked, and that's always a joy to think about the work in a different way. So thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate that. I want to ask you really quick, and you can plead the fifth if you like. What are you working on now? Is there anything that's down the road, or is it like, hey, this one's done and we're going to take a little break?
As of yesterday, I am 201 pages into my second novel.
Yes.
And so I'm hoping this might be a big one, because I'm 200 pages in and I'm still just touching the
Okay.
surface.
Okay.
And there's some research I have to do before I can really get into the meat of it.
Mm.
But I'm hoping to be done with the first draft at least by the end of next year. So hopefully soon you'll be seeing another novel from me.
All right. Can't wait to read it. Can't wait to continue to read and hear about all the great works you continue to do. Thank you for Son of Baldwin. Thank you for all the things you do to prop up other authors, and just put so much good written word out into the world.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Been a pleasure.